Hello and welcome. My name is Dan Durst, and these are the top issues facing federal grant recipients right now. The COVID-19 crisis resulted in a lot of operational capacity loss and also increased costs to federal grant recipients. OMB issued a memorandum in March of this year to address some relief items and to provide recipients with some flexibility with respect to reporting deadlines and other types of costs that they may have incurred during the pandemic. So we're going to take a look at that memorandum and talk about some of those relief items and how your organization can take advantage of those. Also, we're going to talk about the proposed updates to uniform guidance. This is one of the biggest developments in federal grants compliance space because uniform guidance has not been updated since it was first issued back in 2014. So we're going to take a look at where that currently stands and when you could expect to see those updates go live. OMB's administrative relief followed this timeline. On January 13th, we had our first confirmed case of COVID-19 in the U.S. A lot of state public health agencies and state governors then started issuing these stay-at-home orders that really impacted a lot of our federal grant programs and their operational capacity, especially organizations that had maybe in-person beneficiaries or other in-person or in-office requirements associated with their programs. On March 9th, OMB issued Memorandum M20-11 that provided its first set of administrative relief. The applicability of this memorandum was limited to organizations that had a specific impact on the COVID-19 crisis. So if you were conducting research on a COVID-19 related treatment, or if you were providing supplies, services, or other capacity in support of the response to the COVID-19 crisis. So this was really limited in applicability. The memorandum that everyone in the federal grants community that was really looking for, and we were glad to see, was issued on March 19th, and that was OMB's Memorandum M20-17. This one had a much broader applicability and really applied to any organization that had operational capacity loss or increased costs due to COVID-19. Which we could say just about every organization experienced that. On March 23rd, the first awarding agency implemented the flexibilities that was provided in OMB's M20-17, and that was the National Science Foundation. And so when we talk about OMB's administrative relief and the memorandum they issued, it's always important to remember that you want to reference your federal awarding agency's implementation guidance, as OMB only provided them with a series of items they thought that they should address. It was up to the awarding agencies to implement the actual relief and the administrative requirement extensions and whatnot. So M20-17 addressed the following items. So flexibility with SAM registration. What this essentially provided was for that an organization could submit a proposal on a current notice of funding without an active SAM registration. Typically, SAM registration is required in order to submit a proposal or an application for funding. Number two there, flexibility with application deadlines. This gave federal awarding agencies the ability to extend deadlines that were falling in the end of March, April, and early May timeframe, in recognition that a lot of organizations were struggling to put together compliant proposals during that time period due to the shift in operational working environment and the loss of operational working capacity for the folks that were doing the bid and proposal work. Number three, a waiver of notice of funding opportunities. So this was essentially providing a flexibility to federal awarding agencies to publish a notice of funding opportunities for less than 30 days. So this would kind of expedite the process of giving an award to an organization that they thought could directly impact COVID-19 and without having to stick to the 30-day kind of competitive process of receiving applications. Number four there, no cost extensions on expiring awards. This is probably the biggest advantage that a lot of organizations should be looking at taking advantage of. During the shutdowns and the loss of operational capacity, a lot of organizations were probably having difficulty meeting their programmatic milestones. Well, what they're saying here in the memorandum is that if your award is set to expire between now and the end of 2020, you can have a 12-month no-cost extension, kind of fast track to approval. And so if your organization struggled meeting your programmatic milestones and you think you need some more time to spend the funds and implement the programmatic activities that you're on the hook for, make sure you reach out to your federal awarding agencies and seek these no-cost extensions. Number 5 there, abbreviated non-competitive continuation requests. So if you're familiar with these, in a situation where you have a discretionary or competitive grant that's issued, if you're going to issue a follow-on award to the incumbent organization, typically you have to have a non-competitive continuation request to do that. They're essentially providing approval for these non-competitive continuation requests based off of a simple assertion by the incumbent organization that it can continue to provide the services necessary to continue the programmatic activities. So this is really going to provide for an expedited type of approval here for these non-competitive continuation requests. And if you operate under these and are seeking a follow-on award, now is the time to get this request in. Number 6, allowability of salaries and other project activities. So one of the number one questions that we were receiving when the stay-at-home orders went into effect was, are we eligible to continue to pay our direct labor folks on our grants, even if they're not able to work on the grants currently, or if they are in the process of transitioning to remote work? And ultimately, OMB here has given you kind of a soft yes. You can pay them pursuant to a policy that the organization adopts and applies uniformly that dictates how you pay salaries in unexpected or extraordinary circumstances, and in which case that would be the COVID-19 pandemic currently. So you want to get a policy like that in place in your organization so that you don't have the allowability of those salaries questioned come audit time. Number 7, allowability of costs not normally chargeable to awards. So a lot of organizations were incurring costs associated with the cancellation of events, the cancellation of travel plans, and just generally the increased costs associated with cancellation of different obligations that you entered into. Federal awarding agencies have taken a little bit different approaches as far as how they've implemented this item here. You want to reference your federal awarding agency implementation guidance associated with this memorandum to see how they're treating this. Some federal awarding agencies have basically determined these costs to be allowable, just at face value. Others have requested that the organization seek reimbursement from the carrier or other vendor before seeking reimbursement for those costs from the federal government. So it's really going to be dependent on who your federal awarding agency is. You want to reference their implementation guidance specifically. Number 8 there, prior approval requirement waivers. Again, this is drastically different depending on your federal awarding agency. OMB left this item really up to them to interpret which prior approval requirements they wanted to waive specifically. So when seeking these prior approval waivers, make sure you consult directly with your federal awarding agency implementation guidance. Number 9, exemption of certain procurement requirements. So the requirement associated with not having a geographical preference on federally funded procurements, and also the requirement associated with ensuring that you solicit minority businesses, women business enterprises, and small businesses. Those requirements have been waived during this public health emergency period. We recommend that if you're going to not comply with those requirements during this period, that you note that in the procurement file so that you're not subject to audit findings later. Number 10, extension of financial performance and other reporting. So as we know, we've got our quarterly SF 425s that are due. We've got our narrative performance reports that are due. OMB is basically providing for an extension of an additional 3 months or 1 quarter on the submission of these SF 425s and performance reports. So really a good opportunity for you and your administrative folks to catch your breath and make sure the reports you're submitting are current, accurate, and complete. Number 11, we've got the extension of currently approved indirect cost rates. So HHS, being one of the largest cognizant agency for indirect costs for federal grant recipients, has acknowledged that they're providing a 12-month extension on the submission of indirect cost rate proposals for organizations that currently negotiate indirect rates through them. Extension of closeout. So this is providing an additional several months in order to meet your closeout requirements associated with final disclosures, providing final SF-425. So if you're entering into the closeout process, you could potentially seek an extension here under this closeout provision from number 12. Number 13, extension of the single audit submission. OMB is providing for a 6-month extension on the 9-month deadline to submit your single audit report into the single audit database. So as you know, if you expend over $750,000 a year in federal funds, you have to have a single audit conducted. If you're a federal grant recipient, a non-federal entity. And typically these reports are due into the single audit database and certified 9 months after the fiscal year end. And so OMB is providing for an additional 6 months extension on that 9-month deadline. So likely your auditors have probably not been able to come in and audit you during this, COVID-19 shutdown. So you want to try and work with them and ensure that you can extend the timeline associated with those submissions and make sure that you get those single audit reports in no later than 6 months after the original 9-month deadline. Proposed updates to uniform guidance. So on January 22nd, OMB issued proposed updates to uniform guidance. They called it proposed guidance into the Federal Register. And essentially what this is doing is this is going to update uniform guidance per the 5-year update requirement that was written in when it was originally published. So basically they're taking a look at what's been misinterpreted over the years, what needs to be clarified, also what new rules do they want to implement and impose on our federal grant recipients. When it was issued on March 22nd, or on January 22nd, it was open to a comment period. That comment period closed on March 23rd. During the comment period, they received over 200 public comments on the proposed updates. Capital Edge submitted comments. The National Grants Management Association submitted comments. Just about every organization that deals with federal grants in a major capacity had some concerns related to some of the changes that were proposed. The next update that we're expecting out of OMB with respect to these changes is August of 2020. They're supposed to evaluate our comments in the meantime and potentially make updates to the revisions that they had planned to make. So this is an area that we're watching really closely and will provide updated information as it becomes available.